Just put it next to me. Thanks so much. I want to say something before I leave. I won't be able to access. And as much as I would love to stay, بس I have some kind of شكرا والله يجزاك الله بارك الله فيك جزاك الله خير Shall we start? Okay. Okay. السلام عليكم. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم والصلاة والسلام على أشرف المرسلين. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونتوب إليه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهدي الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له. وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له. وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم تسليما كثيرا. ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله ولا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. Respected elders, my dear sisters and my dear brothers, I wish to first and foremost extend my heartfelt gratitude for your kind presence tonight. I know you have choice, and to come in a cold night, inshallah, to join this study circle and be in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as his guest, to really benefit from some of our deen. Your efforts and your investments are very much appreciated, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to put this, inshallah, in the balance in the day of judgment, inshallah ta'ala. I've chosen this topic with a little bit of an esoteric title to invite us to reflect on the things that prep us for these days that are going to come, days of extraordinary blessings and benefits that should guide us to heighten our awareness and our awakening with the intended purpose to maximize how much we derive from these blessed days that will come and go very fast. One of the nefarious, very poor qualities of the people who have gone before us, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chastised in the Quran in no uncertain terms, He described them as the people الذين اتخذوا عند الله عهدا, these people who think of themselves as having taken with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a sort of covenant of privilege, that they might be above the law or above the rules. And as such, they take Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for granted. And this is why when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks to us for being extremely careful for not taking him granted, he describes it والذين اشتروا بآياتي ثمنا قليلا يا أيها الذين sorry, can somebody help me with the ayah? لا تشتروا بآياتي ثمنا قليلا وإياي فاتقون. So that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made it clear that do not take essentially the blessings of the signs of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in vain, and be pious when you come to the greetings and to the benefits that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala puts in front of you. So it is in that spirit that I have configured what I wanted to share, inshallah, as this collaborative learning for this evening, to use ourselves and our effort collectively together so we can collaborate in awakening and in preparing this self to enter the journey of the 30 days and nights in Ramadan with the intent purpose of capitalizing on all of the benefits that we can take out of it. And I want to start with a little story that should put things in context. My family and I, over this last year, suffered extraordinary tragedies. I lost my mother in the summer, and I lost my mother-in-law in the month of December. Allah يبارك فيكم, آمين يا رب العالمين. And that drove a very, very serious reality that I had to contend with. I do not know about you or about how you feel about these things, but the loss of a mother makes a hole in your heart that absolutely nothing can fill. And my greatest wish and my greatest desire would have been to beg of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to have granted these two women who have given me personally the most precious thing in my life, my own life through my mother, and the presence of my blessed wife through her mother, to have them around to make dua for them for this month of Ramadan. But they will not be with us. And this is where I wanted to start. I didn't want to start on a low note. I wanted to start on an awareness of a little story أنه يروى في الأثر that an Emma, a servant who worked for a house owner, used to wake up at night and engage in tahajjud. And one of the nights, the owner of the home stood up and he found her deeply engaged and concentrated in tahajjud. And he overheard her say the following prayer. She began by saying, Allahumma bihubbika li. And she bursted in prayers after that. Roughly translated in English, the opening prayer that she had began by praying in the following way. O Allah, in the name of the love you have for me, I ask that you do this and you do that and you do this. So the owner of the house, because she's his servant, chastised her. And he told her, Ma hada dalal. What is this capricious behavior? What are you talking about? Shouldn't you begin your prayer by saying, Ya Allah bihubbi lak. Shouldn't you be saying, Oh Allah, because of the love that I have for you, why are you putting it the other way around? This is rather presumptuous, disrespectful, and rather daring in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And she replied by telling him, no, it was not a lapsus in language. I have chosen my words carefully. The man was very puzzled and asked her to elaborate. And he says, why would you say such a thing? And she said, I meant what I said when I said, Oh Allah bihubbika li, in the name of the love you have for me. I meant what I say, and that was the right appropriate prayer for Allah. And she started to list them. Were it not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has given me the strength and the power to wake up in the middle of the night, were it not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has guided me to choose the best action in that night to come and pray for him, were it not for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala who has hosted me during that prayer so I can offer that prayer to him, and were it not for his presence, he would have listened to me when I made that prayer, that all of this would not have been possible. So it is indeed because of the love that he has for me that I am praying to him in what he cherishes the most, which is the love that he has for me. And that is now the starting point of I wanted to give you. So you see, we take a little bit something for granted, which is the tarbiyah and the nasihah of the Prophet ﷺ in the hadith on how he taught us on how we should welcome the month of Ramadan. He used to have a frequent prayer in the month of Sha'ban in which he used to say, Allahumma ballighna Ramadan. And in the seerah it says, and he taught that to the Sahaba. And all of the Sahaba used to be in extreme high anticipation for the arrival of the month of Ramadan. And as they approached the month, they would constantly repeat this prayer, "Oh Allah, belighna the month of Ramadan." And that's where it hit home this year, that I realized that when the first night of Taraweeh will begin, and the first night and the first day of fasting will begin, some of the most beloved people on this planet will not be with me because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala chose otherwise. Walhamdulillah ala fadlillah subhanahu wa ta'ala wa qadarihi. Whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala prescribes, it is His will, and I am here to obey Him and to follow on His instructions. Walhamdulillah ala ma a'ta, walhamdulillah ala ma akhad. This is the position of a believer towards the relationship that we have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So my first point is this. One of the tragedies that we have in our deen is sometimes we lose our way between what I call the bookends of the work that we need to do for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In the technical language of the corpus of Islam, these two bookends are called al-ifrat wa tafrit. These two bookends are like the guardrails on the spiritual highway. The one thing you need to do to keep your lane in order to travel for the destination that Allah has preferred and chosen for you is to make sure that you don't hit the guardrail on the right and you don't hit the guardrail on the left. So what are these two terms of ifrat wa tafrit? Our blessed scholars, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reward them for these definitions. Al-ifrat, roughly translated in English, means excess. Al-tafrit, roughly translated in English, means shortcomings. The work of the Muslim is not to run to the bookend of excess and not to run to the bookend of shortcomings. Meaning that when we prepare for the month of Ramadan, preparing with too much zeal, what everybody is trying to think about, how do I go 0 to 60 was as I enter the month, somebody probably for the entire year, they would not have opened up the Quran once. Somebody for the entire year, they might not have maintained their salat once. And in comes the month of Ramadan, they burn fast, they burn high, and then they run out of steam. So one of the things that we need to do to remind ourselves is the spirit of moderation to avoid al-ifrat. Now comes the other bookend. The other bookend is al-tafrit. The famous hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that whoever enters in the month of Ramadan and leaves the month of Ramadan without Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forgiving him is the worst loser that you can possibly have. Wal-iyadu billah. So in that case, at-tafrit is to guard against coming to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with what is called a mediocre performance. So we need to be in the middle. And the middle is exactly what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen for us because He has made us ummatun wasata. So this nation of the middle way, we are the people that never succumb to the excess and the zeal, and we never get lax to accept mediocrity in our life to be the gift that we give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because He is worth infinitely more than that. So I thought to make it very practical, I would offer a listing of pieces of practical advice. And I ask for that, al-qubul and the tawfiq from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the absolute sincerity for His sake. And inshallah, if these pieces of advice are sound, all the credit goes to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If I made a mistake, I own that and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the maghfirah. How do we protect against mediocrity? This is a very serious, very, very, very serious point I want to share with you this evening, inshallah. There is a whole machinery that does not have Muslims and Islam in their best intentions and at heart to help us. And that machinery is constantly working to teach the Muslims to settle and be mediocre. We are constantly reminded about why we are not good enough, why we cannot put it together and get it together. Why is it that everybody else has X, Y, and Z and our ummah doesn't have that? And my first advice for us as we enter in the month of Ramadan is we begin by raf'il himma. We come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala by bringing Him the best of who we are, not the most mediocre of who we are. And that can only happen if we have a vision of our better self. In other words, we have to be convinced that we can bring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the vision of our better self. So let me tell you where this sunnah in teaching has come from. I find it always fascinating that the single most important characters and prophets in the Quran, when they ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they ask for the moon. They have the loftiest of goals and visions when they ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let's take an example. In Surah Sad, when Sayyidina Sulaiman is going to ask of Allah something, He's not going to ask Him for breadcrumbs. You don't go to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and say, oh Allah, just grant me permission so I can survive one more day, so I can put one foot in front of the other. That is not dignifying to go and ask that of Allah. You gotta raise yourself, because the one you are asking from is Ar-Rahman Ar-Rahim. He is Maliki Yawmiddin. He has the dominion of all of the worlds and the day where the credits are rendered for one another. You don't go to that king and ask for him, can I please have amnesty from my crimes because I'm a tiny little thing that is totally insignificant? Because you deserve better. You need to bring a better sense to Allah. So this is the dua of Sayyidina Sulaiman in Surah Sad. He said, قال ربي اغفر لي. So the first thing that he did, he put his burden down. I don't want to ask you when I have a boat anchor of all of the problems of the world that are around my neck to put myself in front of you and I am broken. He came to him by saying, forgive me so I can come to you lighter and pure in a better spirit to come ask from you. And now I have something to ask. وَهَبْ لِي مُلْكًا. I ask that you give me the kind of wealth لا ينبغي لأحد من بعدي. The kind of net worth that nobody after me will get. Basically, in modern terms and in modern English language, he's asking for the world. That's exactly what it means in today's modern language. That is not arrogant. That is not presumptuous. Where this comes from, it comes from the self-confidence of having himma, of having izzah in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. At-tadallul to Allah, to come to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as somebody who is broken to ask to Allah to heal him is part of the modesty. But the idea is to be very, very lofty in the asking of what we ask from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Because we have a lot to ask for and our ummah needs to be raised to a whole new level because the substitutes today are not available. Liberalism has absolutely crushed and burned. So all of these liberal values that have intoxicated everybody, they are just about gone. Populism is on the rise and it's going to hit the exact same ending that liberalism did. Because everything that is built on hawa is destined to end this way. But our deen is built on yaqeen. It's built on a truth that is absolutely unshakable and a certainty that comes from none other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So let me give you an example. It's very well known in the seerah as the haditha of Ajuzu Bani Israel. And there's plenty of commentary. You can find the hadith in al-Bukhari, inshallah ta'ala, and if you want to review it at your own time, please do so. I'm going to give you the abridged version and connect it to what is called al-himma, to have izzah and to have himma in this deen. So what is this story that the Prophet ﷺ told about this old lady of the children of Israel? Apparently a lady who was very senior went to Sayyidina Musa alayhi salam, and she said, I have a request from you. I would like أني أحشر معك. So when the day of judgment comes, and you are as the prophet that will take your nation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I want to be in your class and in your company and in your group. As you know, obviously in the Jewish tradition, it's a religion that you have to own your keep by following the law. So obviously she doesn't have a mechanism to ascend to the level of prophets. So he told her no. She said fine, and she walked away. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commands Musa to take the remains of Yusuf that was in Egypt and travel with them and go and bury them into the promised land. So that was a divine command. Now Musa has a problem. Where is the grave of Yusuf? Nobody knows. So they bring the bad news to Musa by telling him, you know, there is an old lady that actually knows where the grave is. So he goes and talks to her. She said, you remember what I asked for before? Where that will be my barter. You make me في مقام الأنبياء, in the status of prophets, and I will tell you where the grave is. So let me tell you about the morality of what this story is about. And obviously Musa approves, and the story continues. Let me tell you what the story is of this particular one. Think about all of these things that are based on game theory. When somebody asks you, what is the one thing that you would want to have, that you cannot ask anything else beyond it? Probably most people will go to, I don't mind having like $1 billion company. That's a reasonable expectation of something to ask. Somebody might ask, gosh, I don't have a very good memory. I wish that just the Quran gets downloaded in my head and I know all of it by heart. Reasonable request too. So somebody else, maybe somebody who doesn't have a spouse, I'm dying to get married, and may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just bring somebody in my life. So there would be all kinds of possible requests. But look at this woman. At the end of her life, she wanted to trade something. You know what she did? She didn't settle for al-Jannah. She didn't want to enter paradise. What she wanted to attain is to enter the highest rank, to be in the company of prophets. Boy, you talk about himma. You talk about people who have a sense of self, about what is their purpose in life and what is the most important thing to do. We are suffering as Muslims. Our children are suffering as Muslims, and we have lost our direction in our ability to restore our desire to always strike gold. I'll tell you a little story. The fourth person from the man who has accepted Islam under the Prophet ﷺ and spent his longest tenure in Dar al-Arqam and later on learned from the Prophet ﷺ is Sa'd ibn Abi Waqqas. Where is Sa'd buried today? Where is his grave today? It's in China. A Sahabi who went to China. Because to him, the mission of Islam didn't have a boundary. I'm going to take it as far as I can. That's the himma that we used to have in our ummah. And people are working very, very, very hard to make sure that we don't have it anymore. So my final advice is, don't let them succeed. When you come to this month, come with the himma that is the highest that you could possibly have. That's the first piece of advice. Am I doing okay with time? Is it too slow or too fast, or is that okay? Okay, inshallah. The second one. This is not a fiqhi point. So anything that anybody who will sort of diverge in taking this into a fiqh discussion will inshallah remind all ourselves to bring it back into the main lane. So I'm talking in principles here. I'm not talking about fiqh. I want to talk about the importance of intention. What does the intention mean for ibadah in order to make sure that the ibadah delivers on the commitment and the expectations from that ibadah? But before I share this idea with you, I would want to take you through a little idea on these powers of the things that are abstract and what they can do to people. Today on planet Earth, there are about 8.25 billion people who roam this particular Earth. If we discount the people who are young and newborns, etc., and you take the majority of population, and let's call this a very large number, maybe 7.5 billion, everybody is affected with an idea of a man. Everybody on the planet, not Muslims, everybody on the planet is affected by an idea of a man who happens to be French and who lived in France in the 16th century and who had this idea when he was in a cave of a little house after he had settled from fighting a battle against the Prussians in the Franks fighting against the Prussians in the medieval wars in Europe. He's doing something more important than mine. He's providing water. So I have to give him credit for that, inshallah. This man happens to be a philosopher, and his name is René Descartes. So he wrote something called Le Discours de la Méthode that has changed how human beings think since his time up to today. His main idea is the following one. When he looked at all of the reality around him and all that, he says, you know what? None of this is real. None of this exists. There is no mic, there is no table, there is no wall, there are no people writing in front of me here. The reality that a human being experiences comes into the maxim that he has contributed to philosophy. He said in Latin, cogito ergo sum, which in English translates, I think, therefore I am. This, none of you would spend time reading or trying to find this, but all of you are behaving on this reality because your cognition, your mind is what makes the universe intelligible. Obviously, there are critiques to this idea, and that's not the name of our topic today. But I went that route for a particular reason, because I think that the hallmark of Islam, one of the unique characteristics of Islam, is something that sounds like I think, therefore I am. And what is that? In Islam is I intend, therefore I do. If you don't intend, the do is not real. Am I clear on this? That's the main point I wanted to communicate. I call this in our tradition, these are my words, and I ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to forgive me if I'm wrong. I call this the hallmark of Islam that's called the power of intention. Actually, I don't know of any tradition that has this requirement. Where did this come from? Is the hadith الذي روي بالتواتر عن عمر رضي الله تعالى عنه أنه قال إنما الأعمال بالنيات ولكل امرئ ما نوى فمن هاجر بالله ورسوله فهجرته لله ورسوله ومن هاجر لامرأة ينكحها أو شيء يعني من الدنيا هذه. And this whole hadith that is long and has many other aspects to it, it begins with this fundamental idea that all actions that are part of our ibadah that we intend, they do not exist if we don't intend them. So what is this intention then? Is it that you stand up on the night of Ramadan just before we begin the first cycle of Taraweeh, نويت أن أصلي أن أصوم رمضان إيمانا واحتسابا? That is part of it. That is not it. That is not the niyyah that is being discussed in this hadith. I'll tell you what it means. What is this niyyah discussed in this hadith? I spent a lot of time working on this particular stuff on this hadith, so I think I have a little bit something to offer on this that might be of value. You know, there is a verb in the English language which is extremely powerful. It's called summoning. When you summon something, which is you bring it to, you command it to come into the reality of something you're trying to do. What the niyyah is in Islam is to summon the soul to enter into a state of ubudiyyah. So I'm going to repeat that because that's a very, very, very important and powerful idea. So that's one of the very key ones for tonight. So to make a niyyah, We have this thing, the soul is an incredibly complicated thing. SubhanAllah, the vernacular of the Quran to talk about our inner dimensions describes many things. Al-qalb, wal-lub, wal-nafs. So there are many of these components that are inside us, each of which is an extremely complicated component that goes beyond of the lecture of today. But it's interesting that in my definition, what the soul is, ruh is the container of all of these things. This is why it is so mysterious that when the Yahud of Medina came to the Prophet ﷺ and they asked him the so-called litmus test to prove whether his nubuwah was true or false, they did ask him, what say you about the soul? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala intervened in the Quran and commanded him to respond in the manner that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wanted him to respond. قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي. That's not your territory, that's not your domain, because its complexity and its mystery is infinitely more complex than that. And yet, subhanallah, that the power of the niyyah can summon the soul to say, the time has come for you to enter into ibadah. Do you now understand the power of intention? That's what I was talking about. Does this make sense? Okay, so that's inshallah the second step that I wanted to share with you, inshallah. The third step is one that I invite each and every one of us, inshallah, to take to heart, because I am extremely concerned about the welfare of our collective communities, because I think that this requirement in the Quran of sulh dat al-bayn, for every single Muslim to be invested in mending relationships and fixing relationships with one another, is not taking its fair share for doing what's right. Slowly and steadily, and you can look at it all the way through in the things that we do as Muslims. When we do the retreats, what's the most important emphasis in the retreat? Is to work on yourself. Everybody who tries to give you a dars or who tries to remind you of something, they will always remind you, you have nothing to offer if you don't work on yourself. Extremely important advice. This is a foundation, obviously, because فَقِدُ الشَّيْءِ لَا يَعْطِيهِ. If you don't have something to offer, then you have nothing to offer. You can't help anybody else. So you have to have a minimum threshold to do something. But I would argue that what we did as Muslims, in order to support the requirement of fixing the self, we played in what is called in game theory a zero-sum game. We sacrificed the collective in order to enhance the self. You can't have it that way. As a Muslim, you cannot accept the tyranny of or. It's not me or the community. As a Muslim, it's me and the community. You cannot have one without the other. هم القوم لا يشقى جليسهم بهم. So you have value only in as much as you belong to something in Islam. You cannot be an isolated black sheep running all there by yourself and you have all of the credit to yourself, and then you kick the ladder and nobody comes up in order to chase on that particular ladder. So what's the advice here that we need to do in order to fix this? The prerequisite for mending any relationship becomes with husn al-dhann, to think well of your brothers and sisters and to always make 1,000 excuses about why they came at you from this particular perspective or that particular angle. You are in the business of finding excuses for them. You are not in the business of being the judge, the jury, and the executioner to figure out how you bring them on trial such that they have to satisfy all of the requirements. That system will not work. So let me give you a little story that illustrates this from the tarbiyah of our beloved Prophet ﷺ. One day in Medina, one of his neighbors, who was known for having good cuisine in his home, he came to invite the Prophet ﷺ to come and break bread and share a meal with him. So when the invitation comes, Aisha radiallahu ta'ala anha was sitting next to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and the man asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to come to his home. So the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam says, وَهَذِهِ, and how about Aisha? In other words, my wife to be part of the invitation. And the man said, no. The invitation is only for you. Well, obviously, you could say that the social skills and manners of our community are still work in progress. So, and to this very day, we still have to work. We have still do some work on this. So the Prophet ﷺ looks at the man back, and you know that in Islam there is a requirement in Islam that you cannot turn down an invitation. As part of al-adab of how the Muslims relate to each other, you cannot turn down an invitation. So the Prophet ﷺ responds to him back and he says, Fala, then I'm not coming. So you would think that he got the hint, but some of the desert Arab people who have a little bit thick-headed, they are from Missouri on this one, he comes back at him the second day and he puts back the invitation in front of the Prophet ﷺ, and then the Prophet ﷺ repeats exactly the same scenario. Says, وَهَذِهِ. He says, no. So the Prophet ﷺ told him, Fala, I'm not coming either. Now we come to the thing always in Islamic teaching, which is called the rule of three. My late father, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give him rahmah, he used to say that in our family, we get everything very quickly, but you have to explain it to us for a long time. So we're sort of understanding things quickly, but you have to repeat things many times to us to understand. So at the third time, he comes to the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. He asks him the same question. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam responded the same way. He says, "Fahadi," and the man looks at the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a smile and says, "Naam, okay, so she can come along with you." So I want everybody to pause for 5 seconds, and I want you to genuinely and authentically run the experience through your heart, not through your mind, through your heart. If you have been on the receiving end of the invitation of this man, he humiliates you in front of your wife. He doesn't accept her to be part of the invitation party. He doesn't do it once, he doesn't do it twice. And for the third time, he comes to ask again, what would you do? My answer is very simple. Are you kidding me? Go pound sand and fix your manners before you come back and talk to me again. What did the Prophet ﷺ do? فَتَدَافَعَ. Him and Aisha butted their shoulders side by side to race towards satisfying the man in order to honor his invitation. What's the moral of this particular story in Hasn al-Dhann? You see, it's very, very, very easy to burn a bridge. I can write books about this. It's very easy to burn a bridge. But the idea to have a heart inside you that is able to always find room for the shortcomings of a Muslim, because you want to be the example of the Prophet ﷺ and think well of this is the way that the Prophet ﷺ thought about it. It was a transaction. He made an offer. I refused. He refused. He made the offer a second time. I refused. We refused. It's a mistake. It's a transaction. It's not a life sentence. The world doesn't have to stop. We don't have to start enmity. We don't have to go and start a new masjid because I can't pray behind this imam. We don't have to go and smear the entire reputation of this person because I have to destroy him, his family, his children, his wife, and everything else. I tell you, we can't enter the rows of Ramadan if this is not cleaned up. We just can't. It's a fallacy, it's a joke. Because that's what makes us who we are, or it doesn't make us who we are. So if you have some broken things before the month of Ramadan, go fix them. Just go fix them. And if you take the first step, you are more honorable than the person that took the second step. So the win is on your side. You don't have to worry about your personal ego or reputation or things like that at all. The next step that I want to share, inshallah ta'ala, and I'm wrapping up, so there are just 2 more, and I will come to an end, inshallah. Guaranteed, right? First night in Ramadan, probably not the first night if people behave themselves, but maybe the second night. All of the parking spots are going to be parked the wrong way. The road is going to be blocked. The neighbors will scream murder. The kids will come at the back there. The imam, it's impossible to hear him. And just it goes like this, right? So ideally, I remember I give a khatira every night in the masjid where I pray Taraweeh. So one night it really got bad. So I subhanallah, I love that kid to death. He's a young hafiz, and he could actually power through it. I mean, he could continue to read with this entire stereo noise that's coming from the back that probably no musalli on that evening could hear anything, but he still powered through it. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put his in his hasanat. It was just an amazing performance. First thing I did when I stood up for the khatira, I said, okay, tonight I'm volunteering to babysit. I'm not giving a khatira because we have an emergency, like the patient is dying. So I gotta go babysit. So the funniest thing is that the brothers stood up. They said to the sisters, don't babysit anymore, we'll go do it, which I thought was hilarious, which was a very important thing. So this thing is what I call in Ramadan to show a little bit of patience when things run a little hot and a little difficult. Like this sabr is a very beautiful thing. So I wanted to share with you something, inshallah ta'ala, which is from the model of our beloved leaders from the Sahaba in Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, in just an unbelievably beautiful incident in managing conflict and managing hardship. It was something, I can't remember exactly what the source of the conflict is, but Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu got into crossing swords with somebody else where they disagreed on something, and they went to Sayyidina Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and they asked him to adjudicate the case between them. So he listened to the case, and during the entire case, whenever he wanted to refer back to Sayyidina Ali, he called him Abu al-Hasan. So after he adjudicated the case and he made everybody whole, and they dispersed after the meeting, he followed Sayyidina Ali ibn Abi Talib radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he said, I feel that you are not in a good place. So you're off, something is not right with you. He told him, yes, absolutely. How can you do this? First of all, we are coming to you as a judge. We are two parties in a conflict. You cannot call me by my nickname, the minimum thing to just in US courts, right? So even if the judge knows you as Mohamad or Ali, they're going to call you by your last name, Mr. Lazzouni. That's what the protocol is expected to be. So it says the minimum is you should have done something different and not call me like this. And so Sayyidina Umar does something which I personally think is something that people should teach at advanced postgraduate courses in ethics and conflict management. So he turns to Sayyidina Ali radiallahu ta'ala anhu, and he starts again with the same nickname. He tells him, Ya Abu al-Hasan, أخذنا ديننا عنكم. We have learned our religion through your hands. وأنتم من أهل البيت. I'm nobody, but you belong to أهل البيت. وصهر رسول الله, and you are married to the daughter of the Prophet صلى الله عليه وسلم. So your rank in my heart is here. So when I call you by your nickname, I'm calling you not because I'm trying to make a point. I'm calling you because of respect and the love that I have for you. So that's what the sabr is. That's the exercise of something. So I tell you, and Allah is my witness, on that evening when I volunteered to go and babysit those kids, I didn't want to embarrass the parents or chastise them. I meant it from the bottom of my heart that for the benefit of everybody who is in salat to be able to hear and make the full advantage of their salat, I'm willing to sacrifice to go out and keep people quiet. Because if my brothers win in being concentrated in that salat and they might make dua, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might look at me with an eye of mercy and maybe I can get a little bit of that credit. That's the spirit in which I did it. It's no more than that. And so that's the spirit that I think we need to bring this Ramadan, inshallah ta'ala. So I'll bring it to close, inshallah, because mashallah, bismillah, your community is pretty amazing. By the way, I'm a little shocked with something, like nobody is on a cell phone. Oh, there is one. Okay, so we're gonna toss you out. Somebody else? Okay, we're gonna toss you out because I'm pretty amazed. I mean, really, like if I had gold stars, I would go around and give you all one. Because usually all the time my competition is cell phones. I'm like saying to people, like, put this thing down, please. So inshallah, a conclusion very quickly, and inshallah everybody bihawlillah ta'ala can contribute their own opinion or their own ideas. So where did I start and where should we bring all of this to closure? We began with this idea of ifrat and tafrit. So to bring it the loop back so the whole thing close. So inshallah ta'ala, we try to stay away as we prepare for the month of Ramadan, awaken the soul for these great days, and try to make the most benefit of these days by avoiding the excesses and avoiding the shortcomings. So we can give to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a work product that is dignifying of his status and the love we have for him and what he means for us and what he means for our lives and the blessings that he has given us. The second thing that I would like to do as a conclusion to finish with, inshallah ta'ala, is to make sure that as you undertake these steps one by one, I have a tendency usually when I give my advice, when we prepare for something that is very practical, to use what I call the rules of one. The rules of one, okay. Say, for example, that in Ramadan, you have not done this before and you want to start on the month of Ramadan and you want now to have a word of dhikr. Don't try to take on 100 things in dhikr right immediately out of a sudden. Just cold start. Take something that is simple, one, and then stay with it for the 30 days. Allahumma innaka afuun kareemun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anna. This hadith, the Prophet ﷺ said about it, that when you say it, you will have every benefit of every dhikr, and the only one that will get more than you is a person who has said it more than you during the day. Isn't that amazing? يعني سهل على اللسان. اللهم إنك عفو كريم تحب العفو فاعف عنا. That's all. Take that 100 times every day. Rule of one dhikr, one something. Okay. The Quran might be very difficult for you to kind of stay with it and work with it. One page and try to understand one ayah. This is what I call the rule of one. One page of reading, one ayah of understanding. You say to yourself that in this particular page, I will not leave the page before I fully understand what this ayah means. And you can work through these practical steps, inshallah. Does this make sense? Inshallah ta'ala. So bihawlillah ta'ala, I think I have imposed on you far too much. So I will with your permission, inshallah. I don't know who's the Amir who I asking permission. With your permission, inshallah ta'ala, I will stop here. If you have comments or if you have suggestions or if you want to, inshallah, learn from each other, bismillah, inshallah, please feel free to share them. And then after that, inshallah, we'll just make a small dua and then we'll close the khatira, inshallah ta'ala. Bismillah. Yeah. You take this one? Yeah, sure.
Assalamu alaikum, brother. You caught me on my phone, but I was writing a question for you. So this is my question. So you mentioned mending relationships, and you mentioned Umar radiallahu an. And on the aspect of justice, looking at his past examples, he was really tough on the governors he appointed from the Sahaba, Abu Hurairah, Amr ibn al-As, Muawiyah, Sa'ad ibn Abi Waqqas. And in these cases, he was very tough on them because he wanted justice. And of course, he upset them. But he had a vision of justice in that sense, right? So how do you encourage us and what we believe to be as justice and fairness as Muslims, which will inevitably upset some people, some fellow Muslims? Jazakallah khairan.
Well, yeah, that's a terrific question. I think that sometimes what we do when we use these comparisons here, inadvertently we make something that is called category mistakes. Okay, so let me just elaborate on this because this is a phenomenal question, extremely probing and very, very good. There is no question that a nasiha advice has an element to it like bad taste in medicine. Like it's good for your body, but sometimes when you take something and the taste of this thing is just pretty horrible, but it does fix something inside your body. But I am going to argue, unlike the case of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, where the purpose of the mission was to take into account a leader who's managing public goods and public domain requirements for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and managing a trust. We are not at that level. We are not at that level. So the fundamental thing that needs to animate us, the little things, myself, I can speak for others, myself, the little things that need to drive us is empathy. We win people's hearts and we advise with compassion and we align people by being extremely accommodating. Why is that? Because at the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala anhu, if you don't like praying behind one of his governors, you will find 100 other mosques that you can go to. In this environment here, you alienate a 16-year-old and he goes to hell. So the alternatives are catastrophic. So the approach that we need to take is we err always on the side of compassion, engagement, accommodation, unless it is an explicit, absurd level of haram and inappropriate behavior and whatnot, then obviously there are limits. I mean, like everything else in life. But the general thing is we are in the business of trying to keep the people on the boat. And the competition is extremely tough. People will come unhinged very quickly. I'll give you a piece of statistics in case you haven't been following this. Are there any mental health professionals in the audience who are very close or know what it is? Okay, so hopefully I'm not gonna shoot my mouth on this one. I came across a piece of statistics which is absolutely debilitating. Debilitating. The majority of people in the United States between the age of 18 and 24 are either suffering a full-blown condition of mental health or they are at risk of going into mental health. Does anybody care to guess the statistics at which rate we're talking about? The number I read is 50. And that scared the daylight out of me. Because think about what that means. If we sit in the audience, this is what 50% means in this audience. The next person sitting next to you could be a candidate of that. 1 in 2 people can suffer from this. I'll tell you the other part that scared the daylight out of me. Out of that population of the 50% between 18 and 24, 15% of them are suicidal. And I know how the Muslim mind works. So a lot of Muslims, when they pass through this information, you know, guys, this happens only to them. We're immune. Don't you ever do that, ever do that, ever. Because we are one of those statistics. And I can tell you horror stories that will make your heart bleed. So that's my and I apologize for the passionate answer because I really mean what I said. So this is very, very, very important that we don't get our priorities mixed in methodology. The single most potent tool of keeping people on the bus while fixing the problem is via empathy and compassion, not via accountability and stern demands for the rules. That's not going to work for us. Wallahu a'lam, if that makes sense. Yes, sir.
My question is about your intention quote that you had. Sometimes when we do actions, it's really difficult to pinpoint the intention. Like you actually do them almost without fully stopping and pausing and intending a certain intention. And actually sometimes even if you pause, you really can't almost pinpoint it. It's like really difficult to put your hand on it. So are you saying, because I know you said it's not a fiqhi thing, it's more like just like a more philosophical type of way of thinking about it. What would you say is are the actions that we do when it's not that clear, when we're almost in a rushing, or we don't pause to actually intend it?
Yeah.
Do you think these actions could be like less valuable than a pause and an intention and a clear and sometimes you're so tired you can't even like I said, like it's really weird, it's like nuanced, but you can't pinpoint it and you can't really feel it.
Yeah, it's an amazing question. My answer to this is Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, but the variety of the fuqaha who have taken this conversation of intention from those who have a certain rigor, for example, and that would be on the case of al-Malikiyya or Shafi'iyya, and those who have much less rigor when you go to al-Hanabila and al-Salaf that take directly from the Hadith. The spectrum is extremely wide on what constitutes a protocol for intention. So sometimes on the side of the Salaf and al-Hanabila, the mere pivot in context switching. So you could be sitting here, and right now the idea crossed your mind that you intend to fast the month of Ramadan. You're done. It's that simple. You're done. You're good to go. Others will demand that you have to physically alter it. And it's the same thing for Siyam and for Salat. The Salat follows the same thing. So the reason for which I took it to the direction where I took it is because I do believe that there is a dimension of ibadah in our religion that we have abandoned and we need to restore it. Okay, so what is this dimension of ibadah that we have abandoned and we need to restore some of it? It's very legitimate to have Islamic history start from a bi'tah. That's very legitimate because that's exactly what it is. The moment that the Quran descends for the first time and we start from that environment, so that officiates Islamic history. Okay. The Sirah doesn't take that position. The Sirah takes the position that they go before the bi'tah to catalog the biography of the Prophet ﷺ. Okay. Prior to Islam, what was the ibadah of the Prophet ﷺ? At-tahannut. So what is at-tahannut in English? I usually don't like that term. I prefer contemplative prayer because meditation has this whole baggage with the Eastern religions and all that. So I try to avoid that. Contemplative prayer. So this form of contemplative prayer, I think it's an extraordinary. By the way, I'm now getting into the slippery slope of the fiqh discussions that I usually don't like, because somebody is going to hit me now with a 2x4 saying, wait a bit, since the Shara started and the Prophet ﷺ codified the forms of worship, don't talk to me about tahannut. Point well made, point well made, and I'll accept that as a very legitimate critique. But I'm trying to solve another problem. What I'm saying is that in modern life, in today's modern life, the monkeys that control our minds, they don't take a break. They operate 24/7. And especially when they get stimulated with those things there that are called whatever. So when they come at you at night and you don't stop, you don't put them down, and you are constantly playing the slot machine by bringing the stuff down, they will actually carry in your first phase of sleep and deep sleep. So the monkeys will stay with you all the time. So the way to disengage, that's exactly why I use the English word to make sure that my message is clearly communicated. You have to summon the soul. That's what I meant by it. So that was the prescription in the lecture that I used. That is exactly the point. That is exactly the point. So when you, for somehow now the meditation gurus and all that talk about emptying the mind and all of, I have no idea what that means because I never understood it and it's not part of my expertise. But I do know that for salat, part of the etiquette of salat is to engage into a movement posture that is called the istirkha, where you settle. It's called settling into a position. So this whole thing is not, basically, you are not discharging a function because you are an automaton running through a rule book. You are really fully involved into the process. Exactly. And what my feeling is that this sense of contemplation in nature, to contemplate al-aya al-kawniyya, to look at the creation as a form of contemplation. This is why there are hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that if you contemplate in nature, it's better than doing form of ibadah. So all of these things are meant to re-engage us so the soul can be summoned and commanded to come to rest. This is why it's an unbelievable thing in Surah At-Tawbah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about the sakina that comes out. And the sakina is a sense of tranquility in the presence of awe. Like when you look at something that is majestic and amazing, it instills a stillness into the self to bring that self to come to rest. So we enter a state that is a restful state. Wallahu a'lam. Barakallah. Exactly. Exactly right. Exactly right. Exactly right. So inshallah, one, bismillah.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakumullah khair. I'm just reflecting of what you started the lecture, which is Ulu al-Himma. And in this example, the example of Yusuf alayhi salam. So he brought his resume or CV and he said, Ij'alni ala khazain al-ard inni hafidun alim. He did not sit down and say, I'm a humble man. So he showed, that Ulu al-Himma. So, and I'm not asking you to bring the medicine first. What we have is a split personality in the Muslim community where, okay, you have a solution. If we considering ourselves is the only hope for humanity in the absence, like you said, or in the disappearance of liberalism, which was the new religion. So, and this split personality, how do you bring this to reality? A Muslim comes in and come and pray. A kid is sticking his head, his hands on the plug, and he could die. And he goes, Allahu Akbar. He just mind his own business. Somebody maybe in an emergency. It's still this. Where is the priorities? So that's what I'm talking about.
Barakallahu fiqh. I think the spirit that I intended it, in other words, for this himma to be that, I was starting from what I thought was the low-hanging fruit. So there are many other things in what I call community dynamics that could be very demanding and challenging to go and solve them because the list is very long. But the primary thing that I was trying to work on is that each and every one of us, we have a current self and an ideal self. We have a current vision of the community and the future vision of the community. So my point was that each and every one of us, what we need to do is to strive for our ideal self in that spirit. So if we are able to instill this in ourselves, then the machinery that is trying to instill low self-esteem in the community, at least we have an antidote and a vaccine to try to stop that. So it allows us to protect ourselves so we can at least postulate dreams or visions or ideas about ourselves to do that. And what I find amazing about the month of Ramadan is this idea. Subhanallah, it's a month that is characterized by two things. It's the month of the Ummah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has chosen to give the Ummah with. And it's the month of Tanzil al-Quran. So the single most critical events that come into it comes into that particular month. So effectively, when you enter the month of Ramadan, systematically you have been elevated to sacred time and sacred space in order to interact with the whole other level of reality. Every night you come to be in the companionship of the Quran. Every day you are in the presence of fasting in order to put yourself into a state of purity that cuts off all of these distractions around the world from it. So for example, each and every one of us has a form of addiction. By addiction here, I don't mean hard addiction, but each and every one of us has a form of addictions. Some might be addicted to ego, some might be addicted to high performance, some might be addicted to their jobs, whatever the case is. So we have in that. With this environment, we are able to reset that personal vision to develop our own skills for the sake of finding that himma, to be elevated, to be amongst those that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will account as the beneficiaries of the month of Ramadan. So that's the idea, the spirit in which I put it, inshallah. And then obviously from that we can take a book to fix bigger problems. Barakallahu fikum, inshallah ta'ala. So we're going to bring this into a... I'm sorry, I didn't see it. I'm sorry, I didn't see it. Okay, please.
I just find it very hard I find it very hard to try to summon something that I don't actually understand the dimensions of. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, قُلِ الرُّوحُ مِنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّي, right? And the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, وإفراغك من دلوك في دلو أخيك صدقة تبسمك في وجه أخيك صدقة اللقمة الرضاعة في زوجتك صدقة في وضع أحدكم صدقة. And I find that these actions are rather impulsive. You don't do these actions on the prayer mat, right? They come and go like that. You don't get the time to actually summon anything, rather than a soul that's very complex to understand. So how do I make this practical sense of this?
It's a brilliant question. It's an amazing question. I hope you heard it, and I hope you'll inshallah internalize it, because it probes on something very good. So I have a psychology for this. I call it the psychology of deploying on the nafs a deliberate strategy and an emergent strategy. So let me elaborate on this. It's a very weird psychology, but inshallah you'll find it very helpful. So a deliberate psychology is when you aim for the big game that has significant latency, which is to learn on how to do contemplative prayer. That's not easy. That takes an investment, that takes a time. It's going to mature over time. There will be a lot of missteps before it internalizes. And then inshallah ta'ala, slowly. This is why in Islam, ilm al-suluk or tarbiyah ruhiyya or all of these sciences, nobody can achieve that in 24 hours. So you enter on one side of the tunnel and it takes you 3 years or 4 years or 7 years or however long it takes to refine that. Judging by the biography of Imam al-Ghazali, it took a lifetime with like a major pivot in his life to find his way back into his home, in his spiritual home, like a mind like no other, sharp beyond any definition of a cognitive logical mind. So he had to go through this incredibly painful transformation until he came back home to his own self. So that is deliberate. You have an aspirational goal. The aspirational goal sits out there, and you walk the steps, and you cannot burn the steps. You have to walk them one by one until you come to that aspirational goal. So that's the deliberate part. The other one is completely adaptive, because you take small steps, and the idea is you run these together. They are not contradictory. They are not mutually exclusive from one another. So they have to work in concert. And to your point, you have to rationalize such that these two methods exist inside you naturally without feeling a sense of conflict. And you don't employ the long-term strategy of developing the self to near-term relationships that work in that. And the modern scholars that work on this field, non-Islamic, that work on this field, they have very, very specific strategies on working that. And inshallah, if you are interested, they can give you other things to read that will be helpful specifically in this field. It's an entire field today in this modern psychology that deals with that, which is extremely rich and extremely powerful, and it has some amazing techniques. Inshallah. So this is the end, inshallah. So the close. Okay. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. والعصر إن الإنسان لفي خسر إلا الذين آمنوا وعملوا الصالحات وتواصوا بالحق